Dan Epstein, welcome back to the Bookshelf Conversation.
Thank you, Ron. Great to be back here.
So I recently watched an independent, tattered cover bookstores in Colorado where the All-Star Game is being held this year. Had a wonderful program over this past weekend. I think it's still going on. A combination of virtual and live panel discussions. And you're on the panel discussion regarding writing other people's stories. So it was you, Jason Turbo, who's the head of the Pandemic Baseball Book Club, which we'll talk about a little more later. Uh, Dave Parker? No, Dave Parker was a book.
David Jordan.
David Jordan writing about Dave Parker. Mitchell Nathanson talking about Jim Bouton. Did I leave anybody out?
No, I think there was supposed to be one other participant, but she was
Joan
not able to
Ryan.
make it.
Joan
Joan
Ryan.
Ryan.
Right, who are writing about the some of the members of the Giants, and of course your book, which is a new book written with one of my favorite people, Ron Blomberg. So one of the things that was discussed was the name of the book is The Captain and Me, and it's about Bloomberg's relationship with the late Thurman Munson, who's unfortunately the anniversary of his death is coming up in a couple of weeks. Now, how old were you when that happened? Do you recall?
When Thurman died? Yeah, I was 13, and actually I was in New York at the time. My grandparents lived in Freeport, Long Island at that time, and I was staying with them, and we'd actually just been to a Mets game that day where I saw Doc Ellis running on fumes and his final pass through the majors. He just got shelled by the Phillies that day, and it was it was exciting because, of course, at that time, just going to a baseball game was exciting for me, and but it was like miserably hot, and my grandparents were very uncomfortable. We went with their Jewish senior center. Took a bunch of us in a bus, and we got home, and we got back to their place in Freeport, and they turned on the TV, as they pretty much always did as soon as they walked through the door, and there was the news that Thurman had been killed in a plane crash. And I remembered, I was incredibly upset. I actually locked myself in their bathroom so they couldn't see me crying. And this was like the second big baseball death that I had experienced as a baseball fan. The year earlier, 1978 was, and now I'm completely spacing on his name. I'm sorry. It's Angels outfielder who was killed in
Lyman Bostock.
Lyman Bostock, yes. Yeah, so and I remember that being really upsetting, but I wasn't like a major Lyman fan. I liked him, but and it was very disturbing, the circumstances in which he was killed. But Thurman was my favorite catcher, and Thurman was. Thurman hit a home run at the very first baseball game major league game I ever attended, which was May 30th, 1976 in Detroit. So he was always really wrapped up in my, initial baseball fandom. And it just seemed bizarre and so upsetting that, this guy was 32 and still, seemed to have a good career ahead of him, and now he was gone.
I remember I was working at a sleepaway camp in the Laurentian Mountains in Quebec, and the news, we didn't have newspapers on a daily basis. We didn't have television up there. So, the rumors start circulating. And since I was the token American working at the camp, and of course a baseball fan, they all knew that it would be upsetting. So Bloomberg published a book a bunch of years ago about being the designated hitter, which he titled the book The Designated Hebrew.
Right, which is a great title.
Well, I mean, I've met him a number of times, and he always struck me as a combination of Little Abner, for those who know who Little Abner is, those of a certain age, and a gentle giant.
Yeah, he is a he's a country boy. He's just this big, sweet. I like he reminds me, I guess, like I'm not good with dog breeds, but he reminds me of like a really big friendly dog. Just like he's always happy to see you, always happy to talk to you, always just always in a good mood. I mean, we talked during the writing of this book last year. We talked at least a couple of times a week, and last year in the midst of the pandemic and all that, like I think we all needed some cheering up, and one of the nice byproducts of working on this with him was that I always felt really good after I got off the phone with him. He was just always so upbeat and positive, and making me feel good about the future and myself. And you can see why he does well as a motivational speaker, because he really he brings a lot of sunshine with him.
Well, let's step back a little bit. How did this project come about?
Well, we were put together by the agent Rob Wilson, who is also my friend David Jordan's agent, and David Jordan, who wrote the book with Dave Parker, Cobra. And so, Dave Jordan and I talk from time to time, and he called me up. This would have been spring of 2019, actually. He said, my agent, Rob Wilson, is also Ron Blomberg's agent, and Ron Blomberg is looking to write a book, and I recommended you. I thought you would be perfect because 1970s baseball, you know the terrain, and at the time I was really not that interested. I thought I'd been through a couple of experiences doing kind of as told to books. My previous books have all just been me and not working with other writers or other figures. And I'd done a couple of attempts, I guess 3 in total, with various musicians or music related figures, trying to do kind of as told to type of projects. And they were all pretty difficult in their own way, and none of them went anywhere. And so it just, and so that's a lot of work for no money. And so I just thought, like, I can't go down this road again. And Dave Jordan was really, he was like, look, just get on the phone with Ron. At the very least, you can say you can have a phone conversation with Ron Blomberg. And I thought, yeah, you're right. I mean, any chance to talk to a 70s baseball player, I'm all over it usually. So why not give him a call? So we talked and we hit it off immediately. I mean, which again, given Ron's personality, it wasn't difficult, but we talked about, he had a couple of ideas for books, and I felt that the one that really resonated the most with me was about his friendship with Thurman, and that he really had that he was much closer to Thurman than I knew, and he really had a lot to say about who Thurman was, both on the field and away from it. That told me things, as much of a Thurman fan as I was, and as much of a fan of the era as I am, told me a lot of things that I didn't know. And I thought, like, well, if I don't know these things about Thurman and about, the Yankees when they, in this period, then probably a lot of other people who would be interested don't know this either. So we got the ball rolling. We got, I think the first thing we did together was we did a piece for the New York Daily News sports section on the anniversary of Thurman's death, and the 40th anniversary of his death in 2019. And with Ron just kind of, talking about their friendship and talking about, his memories of when he got the news about Thurman's crash. And then eventually from there, we were able to get a deal with Triumph Books to do The Captain and Me, and I'm very happy with how that all panned out.
So if I understand correctly, the Munson book wasn't the original plan. He just wanted to write a book, and then you hashed it out a bit, and this is what you came up with.
You're correct. His first idea was to do something around like the history of the designated hitter, and that didn't hit for me for a couple of reasons. One, it seemed kind of vague what he wanted to, he wanted to talk to a lot of other designated hitters, and it seemed, I wasn't sure that you could really sustain a full book from that. And also, I hate the designated hitter. So it's like, I've always believed that, like, you should only, if you're going to write books, this is what I tell anybody who asks me for advice about book writing: write about something you love, because you have to spend a lot of time with it, both while you're working on it and then afterwards promoting it. So, if I were to write a book about the designated hitter, I would feel, both I would not enjoy it, and I would also feel like I was kind of living a lie.
And it also seems that you're working with your subject on his story. This would almost feel like twice removed, because he wants to do the interviewing, for lack of a better word, with the other designated hitters, and then you two have to sit together and go through that once again.
Right. And so that just seemed like a lot of and actually we talked a little about a similar approach with The Captain and Me. Ron wanted me to talk initially. He wanted me to talk to a lot of other Yankee players from their time together on the Yankees. And while that would have been interesting to do, I really felt that the heart of this story was Ron and Thurman's friendship, and that to bring other players' voices in would kind of distract from that.
When you're working with someone like this, again, your previous books have been your books,
right?
So this must be quite a difference to work with someone else. What's the major difference there?
Hold on one second. Sorry about that. Well, the major difference is that that obviously you're trying to put somebody else's voice onto the paper, and writing my own books, it was very much from my own point of view, my own my own phrasing, my own things that I felt were most interesting. It was all down to me, with occasional editorial input. But with Ron, Ron was the stories came from Ron, and sometimes with my jogging of his memory, I mean but he already had a ton of stories kind of in his arsenal, and so it was important to kind of work through all of those, figure out which ones I felt would be most compelling for the reader, figuring out which ones were factually accurate, because after, and this is with just about any ball player, stories that they've told for 40, 45, 50 years, certain details get fuzzed over, or lost or added. So like for instance, there was a time that Ron gets hurt in spring training, a game against the Red Sox where he basically runs into the wall, going after a fly ball and shatters his knee and is basically out for the season as a result. And for years, Ron has been completely convinced that Carly Yastrzemski hit that pitch, and it wasn't Yaz, it was God. Now here go again, forgetting names. Red Sox second baseman Doug. But anyway, it was somebody much less impressive than Yaz. So it was like, so I had to do a lot of digging through the digging through the newspaper archives and sort of putting his story up against the contemporary accounts and kind of making sure that everything jived.
You bring up a point that reminds me of one of my favorite books is Rob Neyer's big book of baseball myths and legends.
Mhm.
Many years ago, I heard a story. Moose Skowron was a guest on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And he spoke about a certain incident. And I said, wow, the recall that these guys have about one specific game. And I said, but you know what? It sounds a little bit like too perfect. So I went through, I guess it was Retro Sheet at the time, and I looked up the game he was talking about. And again, a lot of the facts are wrong, but
Right.
that's why this book is so great. And I think Nair devotes a chapter to that kind of recall. Uh, Stepping back a bit, I think the decision to just do Ron's take on things rather than interview a whole bunch of people was really the way to go. Because I think you just get bogged down with too many people, too many cooks in the broth, so to speak. Uh,
Yeah, and I'm sure there could be a great book written about Thurman bringing in other people's other takes, but I think that Ron really was closer to Thurman than just about anybody Thurman played with, and they hung out so much off the field. He really got to see a side of Thurman that most people didn't even know about, and even including guys on the Yankees. And so I think that that's really what I wanted to do with this book is like uh, show more of this kind of hidden side of Thurman Munson, the guy, the guy had such a reputation for being gruff and hard-headed and confrontational, and that he was really, he was a sweetheart. He was off the field, at least. He was really, interested in other people, interested in the way other people live their lives. He was into music. He was into I mean, we all know about him being into real estate and being into flying, but that this was an intellectually curious person, and again, I don't think that's something I ever got from any of the profiles I read in Sports Illustrated or Sporting News back in the day.
that's interesting. You say that's what you wanted to do with the book. When it comes to working with someone who, for lack of a better phrase, you're working for because you're telling his story, the symbiosis of that, how does that work as far as your, I can almost see, and I know, and we'll get to this in a minute, I know you didn't sit down face to face with Ron during this whole project, but I can practically see him saying something and you almost wincing at what you just said. And how do you get across that, maybe we shouldn't tell this story, maybe you should nuance it like this without interfering with the fact that this is the tale the subject wants to tell?
Well, I felt it wasn't difficult because we were very much on the same page with that. I think from when we were first talking about the project, like Ron really he wanted this book to show these other sides of Thurman as well. It's just that he wanted other people to chime in, and I felt like, no, your voice is perfect enough for this, and we don't want to distract from that. I think with Ron, it was more like he had the it's pretty clear from talking to Ron that the happiest Thurman was off the field when he was not with his family was when they were hanging out with Nat Tarnopol. And Nat Tarnopol, not a name that many baseball fans know, but he was the head of Brunswick Records, which was a big soul music and R&B label in the 60s and 70s. And their offices were in Midtown Manhattan. Nat had a big mansion up in the suburbs, and they would spend a lot of off the field. They would spend a lot of time at Nat's office. They would spend a lot of time up at his mansion. Nat was a huge Yankees fan, had season tickets right along, right front row, and became very involved in the lives of a lot of Yankee players. And well, that's pretty interesting, and a lot of their interesting encounters kind of came out of their relationship with Nat. I think Ron wanted more Nat stuff in the book, and I felt like that's as long as we do have a lot of Nat stuff in the book, but we left out a lot of stories relating to Nat because at some point they all just kind of made the same points. And so I kind of wanted to limit it to the more colorful, more stories that really illustrated Thurman and Ron's relationship with Nat. And that there are a lot of stories about them hanging at Nat's place and the people they met that I just didn't think would it became redundant after a certain amount.
I think this came up during the tattered cover panel conversation. This book and the previous book is certainly not one of the tell-all memoirs that have been so commonplace over the years. There is no talk about extracurricular activities as far as sex goes, very little as far as drug usage goes. Is that was a conscious decision on Ron's part that he wanted to make this a PG book so his grandkids could read it? Or?
Well, he wanted to limit the swearing so his grandkids could read it. He wasn't he himself does not swear, so it's kind of like it would be pretty unnatural for him to release a book with a ton of profanities in it. But I mean, it was that didn't really affect the overall content of the book. I think what really makes this more of a PG-13 book than the tell-alls you're referring to is that as far as their private lives went, there wasn't, for Ron and Thurman, there wasn't a whole lot to tell all about. Thurman liked to have a few beers after the game, but he never drank before a game. He may have indulged in the occasional greenie. At least there's a story in there about him giving Ron a greenie, and the hilarity that ensued from it. So clearly Thurman knew what greenies were about. But they didn't. Neither of them did drugs. They didn't smoke pot. They didn't do coke. He did say that there were players that hung out that may have done that stuff that they knew, but he really didn't want to get into that, which I thought was fair. It's like why talk? This is a book about him and Thurman. This is not we don't have to go into such and such a player, other players, drug use, or don't have to drop the hammer on them. But yeah, I mean, they both lived fairly clean lives. That they rubbed shoulders with some fairly what's the word?
Colorful characters.
Yeah, well, colorful characters, and certainly some, some of whom were less than savory, shall we say. But they're just really, anybody looking for that kind of story is not going to find it here. But that's not because like we, wanted to make this, we wanted to whitewash Thurman's life or Ron's life. They just, they were pretty low key. They weren't partiers, and Thurman was in love with the woman he'd married and had been dating pretty much since elementary school. I mean, Diana. So he wasn't chasing women. He wasn't even looking at women, according to Ron. I mean, the other guys, Ron certainly is clear about himself enjoying some girl watching in the stands, but like Thurman wasn't even into that. Thurman had Diana, and he was good with that.
It sounds like you had an enjoyable experience working on this book.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, as you mentioned, Ron and I, we still have not met in person. We had great plans to get together, and he lives in Georgia, near Atlanta. I live in Greensboro, North Carolina. We were going to, meet up here and there, and spend weekends together, and have great dinners, and tell all these stories, and then COVID hit, and so we didn't do any of that, but we talked on the phone, and a couple times a week for a couple of hours at a pop, and usually around hour two, like my blood sugar would start to drop, and I wouldn't be responding as much, and Ron would be like, "Am I boring you, big guy?" And it'd be like, "No, man, this is great." So yeah, it really was enjoyable. I mean, I feel like we established a really good friendship. I think he had a lot of trust in me as a writer. He really, I sent him some early ideas, just like this is how I think we tell this story and stuff. And he was, he didn't he was probably the easiest, of all the attempts I've made to do as told to type of projects. He was far and away the easiest to work with, because he really, I think understands, like, he's a ball player. He's got, he's a storyteller, but he's not a writer. So he, and I really, did everything I could to make sure that I was being true to his voice while writing the story, and true to uh, his vision and feeling of who Thurman was. And but it's like, if you have the opportunity to talk a couple of times a week to Ron Blomberg about the Yankees in the '70s, and so much of the time it'd just be like, I would just throw out a name and he would run with it. I would throw out an incident I found in a old New York Times sports page clipping, and say, like, well, what about this? And and sometimes he would be very honest and be like, he'd think for a while and he'd be like, I'm sorry, I don't remember that at all. But then that would trigger something else, and he would run with that. So it was really a blast, and I'm so thankful that it happened when it did, because I think that, more than this project, more than anything, was what got me through last year. All the craziness and upset and worry. It's like I said, I always felt great after getting off the phone with Ron, and then, like, the actual writing of it was so much fun because I had all this great material to work with.
Now, let's talk about the act of writing during a pandemic. You say you spoke with him on the phone. Was it only on the phone, or did you do Zoom with him?
Only on the phone, and we didn't even see each other via Zoom until, I think, January of this year, when we were doing an interview for something together. I don't. He's not super computer literate, and I find that I was doing enough Zoom stuff in my line of work as a music journalist. So it's like, I was happy to just talk on the phone.
As a veteran journalist, you know that there's a difference between sitting down with someone, seeing them as you interact with them, versus just talking on the phone. I mean, there are things you might pick up in their facial expression and their body language that you can't get on the phone, let alone, I mean, Zoom, you could get it a little bit, but
Yeah,
on the phone,
no, I mean, that's very true. And frankly, like before, it used to be, 20 years ago, 90% of the interviews that I would do would be in person. Part of that was because I was living in Los Angeles. Every musician has to come through Los Angeles at some point or another. So it'd always be like, well, when are they going to be in town? And I'll do the interview. But with Ron, I think it was easier with Ron because I think Ron is a very straightforward and kind of guileless person. I never felt like he was hiding anything, or there was stuff that and his emotions are very kind of, you can hear them in his voice. And when he was talking about Thurman's death. I mean, like, it was, you could hear the heaviness in his voice and the sadness in his heart. So I think he was a great subject to work with in this way. I don't know that, necessarily I could have written a book over the phone with somebody else, but with Ron, he made it pretty easy.
well, let's talk a little bit about the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. It started last year at the outset of the pandemic, and it gave authors an opportunity to. It's like a co-op, I guess, where it's right for writers by writers, and it helps spread the word of these projects where previously they would be going to do interviews. They would be going to MLB baseball, sitting in their studio and talking about their books. Obviously, last year that wasn't the case. It wasn't the case this year either. But as far as membership in the club goes, do you apply? Do they seek you out? How did that work?
Well, I, for whatever reason, was not aware of it until Jason Turbo reached out to me about it. Jason and I have some very close mutual friends going back years. I think Jason and I did a book reading together in San Francisco, like in 2010. So we've kind of been in touch and out of touch since then. And I'm a huge fan of his writing and his books. And he reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're doing this thing. This is what it's about. Love to have you be part of it. And also, can you recommend some other writers who you think would want to be part of this?" And but I'm sure, anyone who has a book recently out or about to come out or whatever, should just reach out to the book club and say, "Hey, I want to be part of this," because there's, I think that's the only requirement, is that, you're writing about baseball and you have something to promote.
Is this something you see continuing as things get back to quote normal unquote?
I think so. I think it's been a really a positive thing, and not just because of the pandemic. I mean, I think one of the great things about it is that, I mean, I think as in any kind of writing world, like writers should stick together, and they don't necessarily. And this is we can all, whether it's social media or what have you, like we can all kind of together put our weight behind the Pandemic Baseball Book Club and get more eyes on a lot of different writers' stuff. I think I definitely felt when Big Hair and Plastic Grass, my first book, came out, that there was a lot of like, you know, whereas I would have loved to have been welcomed, like, "Hey, you're writing about baseball. This is cool. Like, come sit at our table." There was a lot of like, "Ugh, who is this guy? Like, why does he think he can write about baseball?" I remember I'm gonna name a name here. I remember when my book Stars and Strikes came out. Rob Nyer was on Jonah Carey's podcast, and Jonah asked him like, well, what books have you been, what new baseball books have you been reading that you think are worthwhile? And Rob was very generous and lavish with his praise for Stars and Strikes, and you could just hear like the contempt dripping from Jonah's voice when he mentioned it, just like, oh yeah, I've heard that's good, just and I just I think like we as writers we need to stick together. We need to help each other. Is now more than ever where the in so many ways the bottom has fallen out of the book publishing world. We need to stick together. We need to encourage each other. We need to encourage others to write good books and not kind of take a proprietary stance like this is our world and this is our club and nobody else can join it. I think the more the merrier.
Well, certainly I could see if there were two authors writing about the same topic, there might be that little bit of competition in there, and you don't want to promote. But for your previous books, you're a gregarious kind of guy. I imagine you enjoyed doing the book talk circuit.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, and I was, and Ron and I were really looking forward to doing the book talk circuit together for the Captain and me, and we had visions of going to New York and doing events together and things like that. So that has definitely been the disappointing side of this, and it's out of our hands. It's I can't blame any bookstore for not wanting to do live events even now, with the Delta variant surging. So I would love to be able to do some live book events for this, but I have my doubts that's going to happen.
One of my big disappointments, and I think you would agree with me, there's a place in New York. There was a place in New York called the Bergino Baseball Clubhouse.
Oh yeah,
and
I think that was the last. I think that was the last time I saw you in person.
I was
there.
just going to say, I was going through some old photos, and there's a picture of you and me and Jay Goldberg, who's the owner of Bergino, who did a great service by having regular events where authors would come in and talk about their books. I just couldn't remember if that was for the 501 book or the Greenberg book that you happened to be at.
Oh no, I was there for Stars and Strikes.
Oh, so I came to see you. See,
Right.
that's what I mean, like authors supporting other authors by going to their events.
Oh yeah, that was such a great night too. I mean that was yeah. Jay's thing was so great, and not being a New York resident, that was the only event I ever got to go to was my own there. But it was a great space. It really he had the podcast associated with it where he would tape the conversation, and yeah, that was it was just like such a. I just remember the room just being completely filled with people who really knew their stuff about baseball, and it was so much fun.
You working on anything now, baseball wise?
Basically, I have a couple of ideas that I am trying to knock into proposal shape. So the next baseball related book will be a way off, but I definitely, whereas I think after Stars and Strikes, I was kind of fed up with writing baseball books, but thanks to the Captain and me, I've got the bug again.
Well, again, the book is called The Captain and Me. It's by Ron Blomberg and our guest today, Dan Epstein. Dan, thank you so much for talking with us today. Stay safe and enjoy.
You too. Thanks so much, Ron.